I have distilled this concept of the hardness of the heart into three basic components: stubbornness, selfishness, and pride. Stubbornness, selfishness, and pride. These three elements will destroy any relationship.
There are many challenges and joys to family life. This season, we explore and offer you ideas, thoughts, and perspectives on how to make family life fulfilling and satisfying to you. When we talk of family, inherent in that statement is the idea that it's a united unit of people. And this is a challenge that many people find, because when you look at the divisions that develop in family, they can be so antithetical to the whole idea of what a family should be.
This is true because the sense is that we share the same blood, same DNA, same genetic makeup in a sense, you know. We grew up in the same bond. We assume we should be united, we should be one. But we all know many families are dysfunctional. There's disharmony, there's pain, there's hurt. And people ask themselves, how can I maintain or at least restore some semblance of love and joy in my family? So we are hoping that today, as we explore these principles, these practical, straightforward principles, anyone applying these principles will be able to either maintain harmony and joy in their home or restore it if there isn't any.
Yeah, and that's why I'm hoping that even our listeners can get something here to use at home, because families can be one of those spaces where you are never quite sure how to navigate, because the connections are multi-layered. You know, it's not just biological, it's physiological. These are people you've grown up with. So there's a lot built into even how you relate with somebody. It's not like at work where it's a single issue where you can easily solve it and move on.
The emotional dimension that joins us as family makes that interaction, as you said, even more delicate. Because on your job, it's just about, hey, we work in the same space. This is our connection. With family, there's that emotional bond, that sense of caring that is usually absent in these other relationships. So you are correct in that. And so when we talk about family, we are again talking about that unit of society, of a father, a mother, and their children, and others related by blood who exist within the same space. This is what we will be using as our definition of family for this episode.
I would say related by blood and by even association of any other sort, because they even adopted children who can come into a family.
Right. Yeah. So that's why we're saying that occupy the same space.
Right.
And you are right. Could be adopted children and stuff like that. But then, Joel, we have to ask ourselves the question, what do we mean by family unity?
Yeah, I think for me, family unity will entail a unit that operates and moves along in their growth with a sense of
commonality, common vision, common goals, yes.
Common goals, and with a sense of a shared values.
I like that, shared values. Mm-hmm. And really, when you think about family unity, we are talking about that group of people who share the same values, similar goals in life, etc., but also that harmony and joy that exists when we are together. So I am saying, therefore, that family unity resides in the love, the harmony, and the joy we experience when we are together. Mm-hmm. Things are running smoothly because we are sharing these common values.
Ideally, that's the idealistic definition of what a family should be.
Yes. And hopefully, not just idealistic, but also achievable, because I'm sure there are families who have achieved that level of oneness, of commonality, even if there might be conflicts. And remember, unity doesn't deny conflict. Unity allows us to deal with conflict and resolve conflict in a restorative, in a redemptive, or in a growing manner. So at the end of the conflict, we are better off than we were before. Mm-hmm. We are closer united than we were before. Mm-hmm. With that said, therefore, we have to ask ourselves the question, if ideally family should be united, and would you agree, Joel, that whenever a man says, I do to a woman and a woman says I do to a man, the dream is we will have a united family. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's what sets that up. That we are going to be committed to this.
And we will be united. We will live in harmony, in joy, in peace. In fact, I was speaking to a group of young ladies once at church, and they were saying, oh, when you see on a Friday evening, my husband and I will be preparing our Sabbath meal together, and the children will be cleaning up their rooms, and then we shall have family worship. And they were speaking, and I told them, you could tell you guys are not married, because it is not as pretty a picture as that, They were speaking from that idealistic perspective. But the point is, nobody gets married to live in a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
We all get married. We all join our lives to others in the hope that we shall have this beautiful, harmonious relationship, and that the children within that unit will be happy and secure.
Yeah, and where there's trust. And I think that's why a lot of us who go through situations in our families where there's disunity, we struggle with trying to understand why. Why is it happening to me with these people that I should be having the best relationship with? Because they're my family.
And it toys with your mind. It messes up your mind and begin to create a sense of insecurity even, of not being valued, because the very people who should care for me the most don't care for me the most.
They have betrayed me. They have hurt me.
They have let me down even.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at family unity, we recognize that part of the health, emotional health of the next generation resides in the dynamics that they live in family. Without harmonious family living, we go into our own adulthood and then our own family units with a lot of issues and dysfunction that now perpetuate themselves in another generation.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully somebody could break that curse, break that. And hopefully today we could look at some of these things. Because I've found out that there's really one thing that more than anything else that destroys the harmony, the joy, and the oneness in a home. Matthew 19, 7 and 8. Read it for me, please, Joel.
That reads, "Then why did Moses say in the law that a man could give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away?" They asked. Jesus replied, "Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts, but it was not what God had originally intended."
What you pick up from this, Jesus' response to these guys' question?
No, number one for me, in light of the discussion, divorce represents when there is the ultimate result of disunity in a family.
Yes.
It's divorce. Let's go our separate ways because we can't work together.
That is exactly what usually they say, irreconcilable differences. We can't live together, so we need to separate. So you're right. Divorce becomes the end result of that family dysfunction.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, Jesus is saying that the challenge is not so much that, or at least that Moses was giving way and sanction to this practice of divorce, but that the people involved in these relationships have acted in ways that are not healthy for them to keep staying together.
And what does Jesus call it? Because of your hard heart.
Yeah. The hardness of your hearts.
That is very significant because Jesus is actually saying God's plan was for beauty and unity. The two shall become one. But something happened that created such disunion that God, really it wasn't Moses, but God said, you know what, let them divorce. So even God recognizes that there are times when a relationship is so damaged, that the people in that relationship are so damaged that they can't live together. And God says, okay, give them divorce.
Mm-hmm.
The disciples and others in their time were taking it to the extreme. So every quarrel, every argument, if I didn't like this about you, you didn't like this about me, hey, let's divorce, let's go away. Something that happens today in Hollywood and with many couples. We get married and after a year, I'm not happy as before. We don't see eye to eye and you want to be divorced, you want to be separate. And Jesus says the reason it gets to that point is the hardness of the heart. So any marriage could be saved. Any marriage could be happy. Any family could be happy if we could only deal with
the hardness. Help us describe the hardness, because Pastor, it's a term that is abstract in some ways, and for our listeners, I'm just wondering how can we help them see what this hardness stands for in practical sense.
Yes. I have distilled this concept of the hardness of the heart into 3 basic components: stubbornness, selfishness, and pride. Stubbornness, selfishness, and pride. These 3 elements will destroy any relationship. For one thing, if I'm selfish, what do I want? What is my attitude if I'm a selfish person?
It's all about me and what I want.
Yes.
My needs and desires are the ones that precede everything.
Yes. But in a relationship, in a family, do we always get what we want?
No,
Can we always get what we want?
it's not possible.
No. Life in a family, in a marriage, is negotiation. Would you agree?
Yes.
It is compromise. It is sometimes I win, sometimes I get what I want, sometimes you get what you want. But ideally, we should all be seeking to find out how can we both leave this table, so to speak, with something in hand.
Yeah. How can we coexist? Yeah.
They call it the win-win.
Situation. Yeah.
Yes. Selfishness says, I have to win. And if I don't win, I don't care.
It's a
I will-
zero-sum game. Yeah.
Yeah, I will do whatever I can to win. Win meaning I get my way. Negotiation says, let's both win. Maybe I can't get all that I want. Maybe you can't get all that you want. But let's see how close we can get to each person getting something that they are satisfied with. So we walk away from this, both giving up something, but both
Gaining something.
gaining something.
Yeah. So it speaks to an attitude
Yes.
in terms of how we engage and interact and perceive how our needs are being met within that space, and always considering the other and saying, it's not always just about what I want or even how I want it, but also saying, how does the other person want it? What do they want? What is their desire from this particular situation?
Take a simple example. Not a perfect one, but I think it works. People's body temperatures differ as we go. Women's body temperature tends to be a lot higher than men. So what we have sometimes at home is, I'm feeling cold, Cinch is feeling warm. So what do? If we heat the room up so that I'm really peachy and nice, she's burning up. If we lower the temperature so she's feeling all peachy and nice, I am shivering. So what do? We put the temperature somewhere halfway between. Or she gives me an extra cover so that I can have an extra cover to keep me warm so that she is also more comfortable. It's not a perfect example, but it just goes to show in this situation, we both realize we want to sleep. But if you are very comfortable, then I'm not. And if I'm very comfortable, you're not. Let's bring it so we are both at least in some way able to share this bed tonight and have a decent sleep. And in so many other ways, in marriage, in a family, we have to have that sense of compromise, of negotiation. Even as the children, there might be one toy. I don't know if in your family you've had a situation where there might be one toy and both you and your brother wanted to play with it. And your father will say, okay, Joel, you play with it first and then give it to
Your brother.
and or vice versa. So that is one thing, selfishness. Then stubbornness. How do you think stubbornness works in this context?
I think it's this idea that it's my way all the way. I'm not gonna concede and allow your opinion or your view to also matter. It's the way I want things that really will be dominant.
So stubbornness flows out of selfishness. And vice versa. They interact with each other.
So it seems that
a lot.
selfishness is more, maybe, I even don't know if this will be a good way to put it, but selfishness seems to be a more external way of expressing yourself with the other. But stubbornness is this internal state of refusal to budge.
I like how you say refusing to budge. And that is exactly what stubbornness is. I will not budge. Even if I see that I was wrong, I'm still going to insist on doing it my way. I will never recognize and acknowledge, I think you were wrong here. Stubbornness is what causes people to hold on to an argument and to prolong an argument way beyond what is useful. Why? Because I must always be right. Stubbornness says I am always right. If selfishness says I must always get what I want, stubbornness says I must always be right. And And I will do whatever it takes to be right. And even when I see that I'm wrong, I will still hold on to my position. Could you imagine how that will work in a family where there's a discussion, when we have to buy something, money is limited, and you want to buy a flat screen TV, a 55-inch flat screen TV, and I may say, no, I think we should put that money towards the washing machine. So selfishness and stubbornness would cause us to quarrel and argue, and even after all is said and done, I would still take that money and
buy the thing I want.
Yes. Stubbornness is that inflated sense of who we are, and that is not fed by pride. So if selfishness says, I always want what I want, and if stubbornness says, I will always be right, pride says, I am always the best person on the block. I am always the one who is above everyone else. My position, my view is always superior to what you bring to the table. And so there are wives who look down on their husband because he's not as educated as she is. He's not making as much as she does. Can you imagine that? He's my husband. He doesn't make as much. He doesn't speak as well as I do. There are husbands who look down on their wives. There are children who compare themselves. I'm the best looking one in the family. I'm daddy's favorite. I'm mommy's favorite. That sense of I am the best one in here, and my opinion is always superior to everyone else's. That kind of spirit, that hardness of the heart, begins to gnaw and to tear away at the foundation of love and harmony and unity that should exist in a family, until we have people taking sides and there's just a lot of dysfunction and hurt and pain.
Yeah. And that even maybe extends to the point I was trying to make earlier to you, Pastor, as we were preparing for this, the point of abuse. Because I think even as you have lined up selfishness, stubbornness, and pride, I think abuse is also in between those, because it's this idea that I will get what I want, how I want it, by any means necessary.
Interestingly enough, we found out that people who abuse other people are very insecure, and the abuse becomes their way of asserting control and power and dominance. It becomes their way of validating themselves, which is interesting, because if the hardness of the heart represents stubbornness, selfishness, and pride, abuse becomes the ultimate manifestation of that hardness of the heart. But from someone who is so insecure that in order to maintain my way, in order to maintain my self-esteem, in order to maintain my position, I need to dominate and to push you into a corner.
Yeah.
Either physically, verbally, emotionally, or sexually.
Yeah. It's funny because even as I think about the hardness of the heart, I'm thinking of the opposite of that, which is the softness of the heart. And wondering that maybe part of the opposite of when one is abusive and wants their way, it's that softness, when you're able to empathize and feel the pain of the other.
Well, actually, we were going to come to that. That's because that's the next step.
Yeah.
Because if what destroys the unity, the blessedness of a family, the joy, the oneness of a family, is this horrible three-pronged monster or three-headed monster of selfishness, pride, and stubbornness, what could restore, what could maintain unity? You use the term softness of the heart, which would seem to be logical. If hardness is this, then let's look at what could probably be softness of the heart. And remember, no one should accept abuse. You heard what I said? Mm-hmm. No one should accept abuse. And I know there have been times, and we pastors may have to repent for this, where we've told wives, no, to stay with your husband. Don't love him, forgive him. Remember, Jesus forgave you on the cross, and women have been abused and hurt, some of them even killed by a husband, a violent husband. There are children who have grown up in homes where they are being verbally abused and called stupid and ugly, and you'll never amount to anything. I am saying, being a Christian does not mean you accept abuse of any type. You may not be able to do anything about it right now because your husband is too powerful. You have nowhere to go because, look, I'm not working. I don't have a home. Where will I go? But you need to seek help. If your husband or even your wife, because some wives abuse husbands physically, is violent and hurts you physically, you need to speak to someone. If you are a child and your parents beat you and beat you in a rage, and they speak to you in such a way that you feel you can just go into a hole, you need to seek help. No one should accept abuse. And don't tell me Jesus Christ died on the cross, and even though they mocked him and they laughed at him, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That was not God's purpose. Jesus took the abuse so that you and I don't have to take it. And even in Jesus' case, he wasn't being abused in the way where his mind and his sense of self was being affected, because he told the soldiers, his disciples, don't you think if I wanted to, I could walk out of this? I could call my Father and he would send 12 legions of angels. I could walk away from this. I choose to walk this pathway in a redemptive effort. So Jesus wasn't abused. He accepted what was done to him in order to pay the price of our sin.
He had a choice.
He had a choice.
For people in the families, the young ones, and even wives and spouses, even the husbands, they don't have a choice in many cases.
And that's one of the great common factors about people who are abused. They feel powerless. What they feel?
Powerless. Yeah.
Perhaps that's the great, how should I put it? The great marker of that abused person. They feel powerless. Because no one who is powerless will accept abuse.
Yeah.
And the person who is abusing feels powerful.
Yeah.
And they're abusing the other person gives them greater sense of power. The only sad thing though, Joel, is the person who was abused, if they are not helped, when they get into a position of power, now they abuse others so that they can bolster their own selves, or they perpetuate the abuse by continuing to feel helpless and going into other situations and relationships where they are abused.
Yeah.
So again, we say quite clearly, no one should accept abuse in the name of Christ. Seek help as soon as you can so that you will get out of that situation. But let's continue. What would be the opposite of the hardness of the heart? What could save a relationship and keep harmony in the home? Love and spirituality. And I can almost hear you saying, but Pastor, that sounds kind of broad.
It's broad and abstract, huh? And high-minded.
Love and spirituality. So let's look a bit at 1 John 13, 16 to 18. See what it has to tell us.
1 John?
Yes. 3, 16 through 18.
That reads, "We know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. So we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need, but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person?"
Right. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. I'm going to pull these scriptures together and see what it's telling us.
"Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealousy or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance."
Yes. And Philippians 2, 3 to 5. Philippians 2, 3 to 5.
That reads, "Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had."
Right. When we talk about love, we are talking about the outworking of these 3 scriptures in our daily life, in our interaction with our spouses, with our children, with our parents, with our siblings. As Paul says, don't always seek your way, but consider others better than yourself. Bend sometimes, give up your rights sometimes, willingly give up your way and your rights to others in your family. He says, Jesus Christ showed his love by giving up his life for us. And as John says, You know, this is love, that you would give up your life for your brother even. You would stand in the gap for your brother or sister. And 1 Corinthians reminds us that love is kind, it's patient, it doesn't rejoice in evil, it rejoices in righteousness. So when we see these principles, we recognize immediately this goes contrary to everything we are normally, to the hardness that we are born with, that selfishness, stubbornness, and pride. So if this is contrary to who we are, where will we get it? Where will we get this love?
I mean, for Christians, for believers, it goes back to Jesus Christ being the model and source of that ability to build those characteristics.
Yes. It is something we have to learn and receive. We have to learn how to love in this way. Because there are two loves that reign in a family, in the world. Just the love that says, I love you because of what you do for me and how you make me feel. And there's the love that says, I love you in spite of what you don't do for me and how you make me feel. We all get married. We all have friends because of that natural love that flows. I love you because
of how you make me feel.
Yes, you make me happy. You give me my way. Like children, notice children. When that child wants a bike or he wants a gift or something and you do it, I love you, daddy. I love you, mommy. Why? Because I got
what I want.
But when you have to tell that child, no, you cannot go to that school dance. You cannot get that iPhone. I hate you, mommy. I hate this home. I wish I was somebody else's child. I wish I was dead. You know, why? Because that human love that we all know says, I love you because of how you make me feel, what you do for me. You make me happy. And that's nice. That's the sweet raisins and the prune and the cherry on top of, you know, the milkshake. It's beautiful. But the love that really keeps a family going, that keeps a marriage going, is that love that says, I love you in spite of. You have treated me poorly, but I will treat you well. You were selfish, but I will be kind. You were stubborn, I will be humble. In other words, I choose to submit to you. Remember what Paul says, wives do what?
Submit to your husbands.
Why are you looking at me with that kind of look on your face, Joel, when I say that? Wives, submit to your husband.
That's a very controversial.
I know it is. But if you just go before that, in Ephesians 5:21, before he gets to 5:25, he says, submitting one to the other. So Paul is saying there should always be mutual submission. But in the marital relationship, he says, you know, wives, submit to your husband's leadership. We don't want to go into too much depth in this, but simply say that submission is not subjection.
That's a good call.
Yes. Submission is voluntary, not forced. I can subject you. I cannot submit you. Submitting is what I do when I choose to allow you to have the leadership. Subjection is when I abuse you, I force you, and I
coerce you,
dominate you. So when he says, wives, submit to your husbands, wives, he is not telling you to be a floor cloth. He's simply saying you have the power to choose to allow your husband to exercise headship. You have the power to choose that. It is a willingness in you to say, I respect my husband. And since within the marital dynamics, he has been carrying that leadership, I will respect that and support it.
And even maybe to close that loop, the husband has to carry himself and operate in such a way that is possible. It's not that just an expectation that is based on the fact that he's a husband.
Because Paul goes on to say, husbands, love your wives as who?
As Christ
loved it and did what?
And
gave himself. So notice, it is not about me. I'm the big boss here. I do what I want. I walk in. No. He says, love like Christ loved. Who left heaven and came to it? Christ. Who gave up everything? Christ. Who gave up his own life? Christ. Who served while he was on earth? Christ.
And that's why we can submit to him.
Beautiful. Yes. Any wife who's worth the name wife will be joyful to submit to such a man. And every man who is worth the name husband will love his wife in that sacrificial, humble manner. Are we still together here?
Yes.
So what inspires my wife to submit is my manliness, my Christ-likeness, my loving her, my tenderness towards her. It's amazing that sometimes I may do something for Cynthia. Like she may want to go shopping and ask me to go, and I really don't want to go, but I say, okay, I'll go with you. And I go with her, and she's really happy because I'm there with her. And we'll get back home, and maybe I sit down to watch TV or something, and she would maybe go to the fridge and say, would you like some ice cream? Or would you like, you see what I'm talking about? Somehow, my giving up my 2 hours of being home watching on my show, whatever, to go with her, inspires her now to come home and show some kindness to me.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, for me at home with Holly, I find myself whenever I do, for example, I see dishes and clean them up and just wipe up the kitchen. She says, do you want me to cook a meal for you?
Right.
It comes without me having to coerce her into that.
Yes. So when we speak about love in a marriage, we are not speaking about something airy-fairy in the air. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 really spells it out. But in a practical way, what we are saying is we have to learn a self-sacrificing attitude of humility and service to others, where we are willing to submit one to the other, where we choose to put others above ourselves, where we choose to consider what somebody else feels. Like Jesus says, as you would like men to do unto you,
Do unto them.
yes.
Yeah.
So that golden rule that Christ enunciated in Matthew that says, hey, I would love to know if I'm tired, that my wife could probably, do the dishes. I would love to know if I'm tired, and I'm feeling sick, my wife could massage my shoulders. I would love to know. Well, hey, Jesus said, okay, then treat her like that when she's tired. Treat her like that when she's feeling sick. Show the tenderness you would like to be seen. Now, if a husband and wife model that kind of attitude and behavior, the children will now begin to absorb that energy. So remember, to have true harmony in a home, it must be modeled by the parents. They must be the model of that kind of caring and sacrificing that you want your children to demonstrate. And then teach it to your children. There are 2 ways in which parents teach their children spiritual values: directly and indirectly. Indirectly, by the way we model conflict resolution, by the way we model submission, by the way we model humility, self-sacrificing caring. They see how mommy treats daddy. They see how daddy treats mommy. They see the kind of dynamics and they feel secure, and they begin to understand, oh, this is how we should live. And now as a parent, you are going to teach them how to work it out in their own little hearts, these principles that you are exercising. And how do you do this? In that dynamic search for spirituality. By spirituality, I'm speaking about the active and intentional search for connection to God. Would I say active and intentional search for connection with God?
Mm-hmm.
How do we do this, Joel, this search? What are the means by which I could search for and be connected to God?
I mean, number one for me, it's through those practices that you mentioned. I mean, by actually taking on this model of love. This is one way of access.
Where would you find this model of love?
Scripture.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way, by studying Scripture. We become acquainted with this Jesus and this model of life and living. What's another way that we actually intentionally seek to connect with God?
Prayer.
Yes, through prayer. And meditation. By the way, Christians don't speak about meditation, but to just simply read the Bible and say, hey, I read 3 chapters, and not spend any time letting that soak into your mind and spirit is almost like a waste. So meditation, where we take Scripture and we ask ourselves, what does this mean for me? How can I see what happened to David with Bathsheba in my life? How can I see the way Jesus treated Judas in my life? What is this telling me? How do I relate to these characters, and how do they relate to me? So there must be meditation. And we do that in our worship. So the way we directly teach these spiritual principles to our children directly would be through family worship. That time when, as a family, as a husband and wife, and also with your children, you connect through Scripture and prayer. And we pray together. The family that prays together stays together. I know people say that, but it is not simply about praying together. It's about all of us actively seeking to engage with God in the search for God, that unity, that one goal. Because love, the kind of love and submission that we are speaking about, is foreign to our human hearts. We want things to be our way. And so we have to learn this, and we learn this through scripture and receive it through the Holy Spirit by prayer and meditation as we interact with each other. And we teach our children indirectly by those opportunities the Bible talks about in Deuteronomy 6, where it says, and this law you shall teach your children when you walk by the wayside, when you rise up, and when you lay down, when you go out, and when you come in. In other words, what he's saying is, we have to find ways in our daily life to impart spiritual lessons to our children. So, Nico, when you're playing with him, when you're out with him, you need to find ways to inculcate spiritual principles even in the daily life. I'll end with what happened with my dad. Some of the greatest spiritual lessons that I've ever learned that have impacted my life, I learned working along my dad in a shoemaker shop or in the yard. When we were building our home, he and I would be out there working on a Sunday, and he would use these circumstances to impart one of the greatest lessons he taught me. One of them, we were in the backyard and we had a plum tree that wasn't bearing fruit at all. It was almost dead. It wasn't bearing fruit for years. And we were thinking we had to cut it down, get rid of it. But this plum tree had a lot of vines growing all over it. And Dad said, hey, before we cut it down, let's cut off the vines. So that Sunday, we cut all the vines that were on this plum tree, cut them all off. And do you know what, Joel? The next year, that plum tree blossomed and bloomed and bore plums as you never believe. And my dad told me, he said, and Skip, this is what sin does to you. Remember those vines that were growing on the plum tree? It was sucking the energy from it, taking all the life from it, and made it useless. We almost cut it down. But notice when we got rid of the vines, how the tree blossomed. He says, bad habits and sin, they suck your life and energy from you. And it's like, wow. I've never forgotten that lesson. And many others that he has taught me. And so I'm saying we need to find in our everyday activities opportunities to be teaching our children spiritual principles of love, of unity, of submission, so that our heart will be soft, so to speak. With a spirit like that, with an attitude like that, with practices like that, every family will be united, will be strong and happy places to be.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Let Us Go Deeper. Let Us Go Deeper is an independent ministry, and your support is critical to our operations. Please make any contributions that you can to patreon.com/LUGD. That is patreon.com/LUGD.